Welcome to Stories with Grandma Selene, where real-life African stories of struggle, courage and triumph come alive. Today we bring you the story of Cynthia, a young girl who lost her parents, survived the harsh streets of Lagos, and faced betrayal, abuse and bitterness head-on. Follow her journey from despair to determination, from sleepless nights on the streets to love, education, and a life she fought to claim. This is a story of resilience, courage, and the quiet power of surviving and thriving against all odds. The rain in Lagos always sounded louder on the nights when grief hung in the air. For Cynthia, the sound of water hammering against the zinc roof was the soundtrack to the end of her childhood. Just a week ago, her life had been a canvas of bright colours, Saturday trips to the beach, her father's booming laugh, and the smell of her mother's jollof rice on Sundays. Now the house was silent, stripping away the colour and leaving only grey. The accident on the Third Mainland Bridge had been swift and unforgiving. A brake failure, a skid, and a plunge. In seconds, Cynthia went from being a cherished only daughter to an orphan. She sat on the edge of her bed, clutching a small, worn teddy bear, staring at the suitcase packed by the door. Her uncle Jide, her father's younger brother, was packing in the living room. He was a kind man with soft eyes, but he looked overwhelmed. He had come to take her away. The landlord wanted the keys back. The furniture was being sold. Everything that marked her existence here was evaporating. Cynthia, Uncle Jide's voice was gentle as he opened the bedroom door. "It's time to go, oh my, the driver is waiting." He stood up, her legs feeling heavy. She wasn't just leaving a house, she was leaving the safety of being loved unconditionally. Uncle Jide took her hand, his palm warm and dry, but as they walked out into the humid Lagos evening, a cold shiver ran down her spine. She didn't know where she was going, only that it wouldn't be home. She climbed into the back seat of his Toyota, watching her old gate fade into the distance, unaware that the darkness of the night was about to stretch into years. The House of Thorns. Uncle Jide's house in Surula was larger than the one Cynthia had grown up in, but it felt significantly smaller. The air inside was thick with a tension she couldn't quite place until she met Auntie Funmi. Funmi was a tall woman with sharp cheekbones and eyes that seemed to calculate the cost of everything they looked upon, including Cynthia. "So this is the burden," Funmi said, not bothering to lower her voice as Jide ushered Cynthia into the living room. "Funmi, please, she is family. She is grieving," Jide whispered, though the plea sounded weak. Cynthia shrank back. She was 12 years old enough to understand rejection but too young to know how to navigate it. Funmi looked at Cynthia's school uniform and her suitcase with disdain. "I hope she knows how to work. I am not running a charity home for lazy girls. If she stays here, she earns her keep." That night, Cynthia was not given a guest room. Instead, she was shown to a small storage room at the back of the kitchen. It smelled of onions and damp mop buckets. There was a thin mattress on the floor and a single bulb dangling from a wire. "This is your place," Funmi stated, leaning against the doorframe. "You wake up at 4:00 a.m., you sweep, you fetch water, and you prepare breakfast before you even think about putting on that school uniform. Do you understand?" Cynthia nodded, tears stinging her eyes but refusing to fall. "Yes, Ma." "Good, don't think because your uncle brought you here that you are a princess. In this house you are a pair of hands, nothing more." Cinderella in Lagos. 2 years passed, and the brightness of Cynthia's past felt like a dream she had invented. At 14, her hands were calloused from scrubbing floors and washing heaps of clothes that belonged to Funmi. The routine was brutal. The alarm in her head woke her before the sun rose. By the time the Lagos traffic began its chaotic symphony, Cynthia had already cleaned the compound and started the stew for the day. Her only escape was school. It was the one thing Uncle Jide had insisted on, despite Funmi's constant complaints about the cost of school fees. For Cynthia, the classroom was a sanctuary. When she put on her checkered uniform, she wasn't the maid who slept next to the onions. She was the girl who topped the mathematics class. She was the girl who could write essays that made the English teacher weep. But the double life was exhausting. She often dozed off during history lessons, her head snapping up when the teacher called her name. "Cynthia, are you with us?" "Yes, sir, sorry, sir," she would mumble, rubbing eyes red from lack of sleep. Back home, the torment escalated. Funmi seemed threatened by Cynthia's beauty, which was blossoming despite the hardship. Funmi remained childless, a fact that made her bitter and venomous. She took her frustration out on Cynthia, finding faults where there were none. A speck of dust on the TV stand meant no dinner. A wrinkle in a shirt meant a slap across the face. Uncle Jide had become a shadow in his own home, avoiding confrontation by staying late at work. Cynthia was alone in the war zone, armed with nothing but her textbooks and a dwindling reserve of hope. The breaking point. The humid heat of a Tuesday evening hung heavy in the kitchen. Cynthia was rushing. She had an integrated science test the next day, and she desperately wanted to study. In her haste to finish washing the heavy ceramic plates used for Funmi's dinner party, her soapy hands slipped. Crash. The sound was like a gunshot in the silent house. The large, expensive serving platter lay in shattered pieces on the tiled floor. Cynthia froze, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Footsteps thundered down the hallway. Auntie Funmi appeared, her face twisted in a mask of rage. She looked at the broken china, then at Cynthia. "Do you know how much that cost?" Funmi screamed, her voice shrill. "That plate costs more than your life is worth." Before Cynthia could apologize, the first blow landed, then another. It wasn't just a slap this time, it was a release of years of pent-up bitterness. Funmi grabbed a broom handle. "I will kill you today, you useless parasite." Cynthia scrambled back, shielding her head. "Please, Ma, it was a mistake." "Get out," Funmi shrieked, pointing to the back door. "Get out of my house. If I see you here when I come back from the room, I will have the police arrest you for destruction of property." Funmi stormed off to get something, perhaps a belt, perhaps something worse. Cynthia didn't wait to find out. Blood trickled from a cut on her lip. She grabbed her school bag, stuffed with her books and her uniform, and ran. She didn't look back at Uncle Jide's house. She ran out the gate into the dark, unforgiving streets of Serula, with nowhere to go and no money in her pocket. Into the shadows. Lagos at night is a different beast than Lagos in the day. The day is for hustlers and businessmen, the night is for predators. Cynthia walked for hours, her school bag heavy on her shoulders. Every shadow seemed to move. Cars slowed down as they passed her, men shouting obscenities from rolled-down windows. She kept her head down, walking fast, fueled by adrenaline and terror. She ended up near the National Stadium, exhausted and trembling. She found a dry spot under a concrete bus shelter and curled up, clutching her bag to her chest. "Hey." The voice was rough but female. Cynthia jumped, pressing her back against the concrete. Standing there was a girl, perhaps a year or two older than her, wearing a short skirt and heavy makeup that was smeared by the humidity. She was chewing gum loudly. "You look like a lost puppy," the girl said, looking Cynthia up and down. "Run away from home." Cynthia nodded, unable to speak. "I'm Titi," the girl said, sitting down next to her but keeping a respectful distance. "Don't worry, I won't bite, but you can't sleep here alone. The area boys will eat you alive." "I have nowhere to go," Cynthia whispered, her voice cracking. Titi sighed, blowing a bubble with her gum. "None of us do, that's why we stick together. Come with me, we have a place nearby. It's not a palace, but it's safe from the wolves." Cynthia hesitated. She knew what girls like Titi did. She had seen them on the street corners. But the darkness around her was absolute, and Titi was the only source of light. She took Titi's hand. It was the first step into a world she never imagined she would enter, a world of darkness, survival, and the selling of oneself to buy another day of life. The place Titi called home was an uncompleted building behind a mechanic's workshop in Ojulegba. It was a skeletal structure of grey concrete blocks, roofless in some parts, with blue tarps draped over corners to block out the wind. Inside, 4 other girls huddled around a small kerosene stove, the smell of cheap noodles filling the air. They looked up as Titi led Cynthia in. Their eyes were hard, assessing. "Who be this one?" a girl with a scar on her chin asked, blowing smoke from a cigarette into the night air. "Titi, we don't have food for extra mouths." "She's cool, she's smart," Titi said defensively, pulling a crate over for Cynthia to sit on. "This is Cynthia." She ran away. Cynthia gripped her school bag tight. The reality of her situation was settling in like a heavy stone in her stomach. There were no beds, just piles of old foam mattresses and wrappers. There was no bathroom, just a bucket behind a curtain. "Welcome to the jungle," the girl with the scar said, her voice softening slightly. "I am Mamaji. If you stay here, you contribute. Nothing is free in Freetown." That night, Cynthia couldn't sleep. The sounds of the city were too close, the honking of trailers, the shouting of touts, the distant sirens. She was hungry, her stomach cramping painfully, but there was no food left. She watched the other girls. They laughed, shared stories, and checked their phones, but underneath the bravado, Cynthia saw the same fear she felt. They were children forcing themselves to be women. They were survivors, and now she was one of them. 2 days passed and hunger became a physical entity, clawing at Cynthia's insides. She had tried to find work. She walked to nearby bukas asking to wash plates, but they chased her away, calling her a street rat. She tried to carry loads at the market, but the older women pushed her aside, protecting their turf. She returned to the uncompleted building at dusk, empty-handed and trembling. Titi was applying bright red lipstick in a shard of mirror propped against a brick. "You look like a ghost," Titi said, not looking away from her reflection. "I can't find work," Cynthia whispered. "I'm so hungry." Titi capped the lipstick and turned to her. "There is work, Cynthia. You just don't want to do it because you think you are better than us. You think because you speak good English you shouldn't stand on the road." Cynthia looked at the ground. She knew what Titi meant, the Italian job, the hustle. "I want to go to school," Cynthia said, her voice breaking. "I need money for fees, I need to eat." Titi stood up and handed Cynthia a short, tight black dress. It smelled of cheap perfume and sweat. "School costs money. Eating costs money," Titi said flatly. "Tonight you come with us, you don't have to do anything you don't want to yet, just watch. But if you want to eat tomorrow you have to kill the girl you were yesterday, she cannot survive here." Cynthia took the dress. The fabric felt like sandpaper against her skin. It was the uniform of her new life. The street was a carnival of shadows. Allen Avenue at night was alive with flashing headlights and the bass of music thumping from passing cars. Girls lined the sidewalks, dressed in neon colors, signaling to the slow-moving vehicles. Cynthia stood in the shadows of a bank building, her heart hammering so hard she thought she might faint. She felt naked in the short dress. Every pair of headlights that swept over her felt like a searchlight exposing her shame. "Smile," Titi hissed, nudging her. "If you look like you are crying, nobody will stop." A Honda Accord slowed down. Titi leaned into the window, negotiated quickly and hopped in. She was gone. Cynthia was alone. Hours passed, her legs ached. A man in a pickup truck slowed down. He looked older, tired. He wasn't aggressive like the others. He offered her 2,000 naira. It was enough for a week of food. It was enough to buy a new notebook for school. Cynthia closed her eyes, thinking of her mother, thinking of the broken plates, thinking of the future she wanted. Just this once, she told herself, just to eat. She got into the car. When she got out 30 minutes later, she felt hollowed out, as if something vital had been scooped out of her chest. She clutched the money in her hand, the notes crumpled and damp. She bought food on the way back to the squat, but when she ate it, it tasted like ash. The transition from night to day was the hardest part. At 5:00 a.m., while the other girls were collapsing onto their mattresses to sleep off the night's trauma, Cynthia was waking up. She would creep to the bucket behind the curtain, scrubbing her skin raw with harsh soap, trying to wash away the scent of cheap cologne and strangers' hands. She would scrub the makeup off her face until her skin was red. Then, she would put on her school uniform. It was her armor. When she buttoned her white shirt and tied her checkered beret, the street girl vanished, and Cynthia the student appeared. She would walk to school, her legs heavy, her eyes burning with fatigue. In the classroom, she was a ghost. She sat at the back, pinching her arm to stay awake during mathematics. The teacher's voice was a drone that lulled her towards sleep, but she fought it. "Cynthia, solve equation 3, the teacher commanded one Tuesday morning. Cynthia stood up, swaying slightly. The numbers on the board swam before her eyes, but she blinked, focused, and the logic of the math cut through the fog in her brain. She solved it. "Correct," the teacher said, looking at her suspiciously. "You look tired, Cynthia. Are you sleeping at home?" "Reading, sir," she lied smoothly. "I study late." She wasn't lying entirely. She was studying survival. Months bled into a year. Cynthia's life became a grueling cycle of duality. By day, she was the brilliant but quiet student who never joined the other students for break time because she was saving every naira. By night, she was Cindy, the girl in the shadows of Allen Avenue. She had moved out of the uncompleted building into a small, shared room with Titi in a face me I face you tenement house. It had a door that locked, which was a luxury. But the strain was showing. Her grades, usually perfect, had dipped slightly. A C in biology felt like a dagger to her heart. One evening, while standing on her usual corner, a car slowed down. It was a sleek SUV. The window rolled down, and Cynthia stepped forward, putting on her practiced plastic smile. "Hello, beautiful," the man began. Then the back window rolled down. A child, a girl about Cynthia's age wearing a uniform from her school, looked out. "Daddy, can we go? I'm hungry," the girl whined. Cynthia froze. She recognized the girl. It was a classmate, Bola. Bola looked at Cynthia, her eyes widening in confusion. Cynthia turned and ran. She ran into the darkness, her heels clattering on the pavement, her breath coming in sobbing gasps. She hid in an alleyway, shaking uncontrollably. It was too close. The two worlds were colliding. She knew she couldn't keep this up forever. Something had to break. The rainy season in Lagos was unforgiving. It didn't just rain. It poured with a vengeance that flooded the gutters and turned the roads into rivers. On a Friday night, the downpour had chased most of the girls away from the usual spots, but Cynthia remained. She needed money for her WAEC registration fees. The deadline was Monday. She stood under the overhang of a closed petrol station, shivering violently. A black Mercedes G-Wagon rolled slowly through the floodwaters, its headlights cutting through the sheets of rain. It slowed down near her, the window humming down just an inch. Cynthia stepped forward, bracing herself for the usual negotiations. "Good evening, sir." The door unlocked with a heavy click. "Get in," a deep voice said, "before you catch pneumonia." She hesitated. The car was too expensive, the situation too secluded. But the cold was biting into her bones. She opened the door and slid onto the leather seat. The interior smelled of expensive cologne and leather, a stark contrast to the damp rot outside. The man behind the wheel was young, perhaps in his late 20s, with a neatly trimmed beard and kind eyes that glanced at her with concern, not lust. "I'm not working tonight," he said, turning up the heater. "I saw you shivering, you look like a child. What are you doing out here?" "I'm working," Cynthia replied defensively, hugging her arms. "Do you want business or not?" He looked at her, really looked at her, and shook his head. "No business, I'm Edward, and I think you need a hot meal more than you need a customer." They sat in a 24-hour eatery in Ikja. Cynthia devoured a plate of fried rice and chicken, eating with a ferocity she tried to hide. Edward sat opposite her, nursing a bottle of water, watching her with a strange intensity. "So tell me," Edward said when she finally slowed down, "why is a girl who speaks with such polished diction standing on Allen Avenue in the rain?" Cynthia wiped her mouth, her guard instantly going up. "Life happens." "Life happens to everyone," Edward countered softly. "But you don't belong there, I can see it in your eyes, you're scared." "I do what I have to do," she snapped. "I have school fees to pay, I have rent." Edward reached into his pocket. Cynthia flinched, expecting a proposition. Instead, he pulled out a business card and a thick envelope. "I'm an architect," he said, sliding the card across the table. Then he placed the envelope next to it. "This is for your time tonight, but I don't want anything from you. I just want you to go home and sleep." Cynthia opened the envelope. It was cash, more than she made in a month. She looked up at him, bewildered. "Why?" "Because," Edward smiled, a genuine, warm smile that made her heart skip. "I have a feeling you're destined for better things than wet streets." Cynthia returned to the room she shared with Titi, the envelope burning a hole in her bag. She told Titi everything. Titi laughed, a harsh, cynical sound. "Cynthia, shine your eyes. Nobody gives money for free in Lagos. He wants something. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but he will come to collect." "He seemed different," Cynthia whispered, looking at the business card. "Edward Cole, lead architect." "They are all the same," Titi warned, lighting a cigarette. "The rich ones are the most dangerous. They don't just want your body, they want to own you." Cynthia tried to believe Titi. It was safer to be cynical. She paid her WAEC fees the next Monday, feeling a weight lift off her shoulders. She didn't go back to the street for a week, living off the rest of Edward's money. But on Saturday, her phone rang. It was an unknown number. "Hello. I hope you're not standing in the rain tonight," the deep voice said. Cynthia's breath hitched. "How did you get my number?" "You wrote it on a napkin at the restaurant. You forgot," Edward chuckled. "I'm outside your street, the tenement building. Come downstairs, I brought you something." Panic and curiosity warred within her. Against Titi's warnings, she went down. Edward was leaning against his car, holding a stack of textbooks. Physics, chemistry, biology. "I guessed you were a science student," he said. "Was I right?" The truce didn't last. The money ran out, and pride prevented Cynthia from asking Edward for more. 2 weeks later, she was back on the street. It was a Tuesday, usually a quiet night. Suddenly, sirens wailed from both ends of the street. Police trucks screeched to a halt, and officers in black uniforms jumped out, wielding batons. "Raid, raid," Titi screamed, grabbing Cynthia's hand. They ran, chaos erupted. Girls were screaming, being dragged into the trucks. Cynthia tripped over her heels, scraping her knees on the asphalt. A policeman grabbed her arm, his grip bruising. "Where you day run go a shower," he shouted, raising his baton. "No, please," Cynthia screamed. She struggled, kicking out. In the scramble, her phone fell from her pocket. She managed to break free, leaving one shoe behind, and sprinted into a dark alleyway. She hid behind a dumpster, her chest heaving, listening to the screams of the girls being rounded up. She was shaking uncontrollably. She had escaped, but Titi hadn't. She needed help. She needed a savior. Trembling, she realized she still had her phone in her hand. There was only one person she could call, one person who wasn't part of this dark world. "Edward," she sobbed when he picked up on the first ring. "Please help me." Edward picked her up 10 minutes later. He didn't say a word as she cried in the passenger seat, her dress torn, her knee bleeding. He drove her straight to his house, a gated, serene compound in Magodo. He cleaned her wound with antiseptic, his touch gentle. She sat on his plush sofa, feeling like a stain on his pristine life. "You can't go back there, Cynthia," Edward said, his voice firm but pained. "Tonight you were lucky. Next time you might disappear, or worse." "I have no choice," Cynthia cried. "I have no parents, I have no support. How do I finish school? How do I eat?" Edward sat beside her and took her hands. His hands were large and warm, enveloping hers completely. "I will take care of you," he said. The intensity in his eyes frightened her. "I don't mean as a mistress, I mean I want to take you off the street. Move in here, I have a guest wing. Focus on your exams, let me be the support you lost." "Why?" Cynthia whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I'm nobody, I'm damaged goods." "You are not damaged," Edward said fiercely. "You are a diamond in the rough, and I think I'm falling in love with you, Cynthia. Let me save you." It was a terrifying offer. It required trust, something the world had beaten out of her. But looking at him, seeing the raw honesty in his face, Cynthia realized she was tired of running. "Okay," she breathed, "okay." Moving into Edward's house in Magodo felt like stepping onto another planet. The silence was the first thing Cynthia noticed. In the tenement house, silence was a luxury. Here it was the default. The guest room Edward gave her was larger than the entire apartment she had shared with Titi. It had a queen-sized bed with white sheets that smelled of lavender, a reading desk, and a window overlooking a small garden of hibiscus flowers. But for the first few weeks, Cynthia slept on the floor. The bed felt too soft, too exposed. She would wake up in a cold sweat, reaching for a knife she no longer carried, her heart racing at phantom sounds of police sirens. Edward was patient. He treated her like a roommate or perhaps a younger sister he was protective of. He never crossed the line. He left for work early and returned in the evening with food and stories about his architectural projects. He gave her an allowance, but she hoarded it, terrified that one day he would wake up, realize she was a street rat, and throw her out. "You don't have to tiptoe around," Edward told her one evening as she hesitantly entered the living room. "This is your home now, Cynthia. You are safe." "Safety feels like a dream," she replied quietly, clutching a textbook to her chest. "I keep waiting to wake up." "Then don't sleep," Edward smiled gently. "Just live, study, be the Cynthia you were meant to be before the world broke your plates." As the date for her WAEC exams approached, Cynthia knew she had one loose end to tie. She couldn't focus on her future while her past haunted her. She took a taxi, paid for with the allowance Edward gave her, back to the old neighborhood. The smell of the open gutter hit her instantly, triggering a wave of nausea. She found Titi at a local bar, smoking and drinking a bottle of stout. Titi looked rougher, thinner. When she saw Cynthia in her clean jeans and crisp blouse, Titi's eyes narrowed. "Look who it is," Titi sneered, though there was no real heat in it. "The Madam of Magodo." "I came to check on you," Cynthia said, ignoring the jab. "I want to help you, Titi. Edward can." "Edward cannot save everyone," Titi cut her off sharply. "He saved you because you are different. You have book in your head, me, I belong here." "That's not true," Cynthia insisted, tears welling up. Titi stood up and walked over, placing a hand on Cynthia's shoulder. Her nails were chipped, her fingers trembling. "Go, Cynthia, don't come back here. If the other girls see you, they will hate you. If the area boys see you, they will spoil you. You escaped. Fly away. Don't look back at the cage." Titi turned her back and walked away. It was the hardest goodbye Cynthia had ever said, But as she got back into the taxi, she realized Titi was right. She had to let go of the darkness to fully embrace the light. The exams came, and for the first time in years, Cynthia wrote with a clear mind. She didn't have to worry about where her next meal was coming from. She didn't have to rush through the paper to make it to the night shift. She poured everything into those papers. Every equation, every essay was a fight for her existence. When the results were released months later, Cynthia sat in Edward's study, her hands shaking as she logged into the portal. A1, B2, A1. She had cleared her papers, she had distinctions. Edward, she screamed, forgetting her usual reserve. He ran into the room looking panicked. What happened? She turned the laptop screen toward him, tears streaming down her face. I did it, I'm going to university. Edward looked at the screen, then at her. A grin spread across his face, lighting up the room. He picked her up and spun her around. For a moment the air shifted. The distance between them, the savior and the saved, vanished. They were just a man and a woman celebrating a victory. He set her down, his face inches from hers. The laughter died down, replaced by a heavy electric silence. I knew you could do it, he whispered, brushing a tear from her cheek. Cynthia looked at him, really seeing him not as a benefactor but as a man. I couldn't have done it without you. You did the work, Cynthia, I just held the light. 3 years flew by. Cynthia was now a student at the University of Lagos, studying business administration. She had blossomed. The scared girl with the haunted eyes was gone, replaced by a confident, articulate young woman who walked with her head held high. She still lived with Edward, but the dynamic had shifted completely. They were partners. They cooked together, debated politics, and attended events. The love that had started as a seed of gratitude had grown into a mighty oak. On the night of her graduation from university, Edward took her to a rooftop restaurant on Victoria Island. The city lights of Lagos twinkled below them. The same lights that had once terrified her now looked beautiful. Edward seemed nervous. He fidgeted with his tie, barely touching his wine. Cynthia, he began, his voice tight. I remember the night I found you in the rain. You were so fierce, so determined to survive. Watching you thrive these past few years has been the greatest privilege of my life. He stood up and knelt beside her chair. The restaurant went silent. I don't want to be just your guardian anymore. I don't want to be your friend. I want to be your husband. I want to build a life where you never have to fear the rain again. He opened a velvet box. A diamond ring sparkled inside. Cynthia, will you marry me? Cynthia looked at the ring, then at the man who had pulled her from the abyss. Yes, she choked out, 1,000 times yes. The wedding was the talk of the town. Edward was a well-respected architect and his bride was stunning. They married in a cathedral in Ikea. As Cynthia walked down the aisle, she felt a momentary pang of sadness. Her parents weren't there. Uncle Jide wasn't there. She hadn't spoken to him since the day she ran away. But as she looked at the pews, she saw a few friends from the university. She saw the life she had built. She wore a gown of imported lace fitted to perfection. When she reached the altar, Edward took her hand. His grip was firm, grounding her. I, Edward, take you, Cynthia. As she repeated the vows, Cynthia looked past Edward's shoulder at the stained glass window. She thought of the cold concrete floor of the bus stop. She thought of the hunger. She thought of the shame, and she let it all go. I, Cynthia, take you, Edward, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health. When the priest pronounced them husband and wife, and Edward kissed her, the congregation erupted in cheers. It wasn't just a marriage, it was a coronation. The street girl was gone. Mrs. Cynthia Cole had arrived. And as they walked out into the bright Lagos sunshine, Cynthia knew that her story was far from over. But the next chapter would be one of her own making. Would you like me to proceed with? Time in Lagos moves differently when you are watching it from the window of an air-conditioned office rather than the side of a road. 5 years had passed since the wedding, and Cynthia Cole had transformed into a force of nature. She had graduated with top honours and, with Edward's encouragement and capital, started a logistics company. It was tough work, dominated by men, but the girl who had survived the streets of Ojulegba was not easily intimidated by truck drivers or port officials. She was known for her fairness but also her steel. Their home in Magodo had been renovated to reflect their shared life. It was filled with art, laughter, and the warmth of a marriage that was built on deep, unshakable friendship. Cynthia had learned to play tennis at the Ikoyi Club. She hosted dinner parties where she charmed foreign investors. The street rat label had been scrubbed away, replaced by Madam CEO. Yet Cynthia never forgot. Every month a portion of her company's profits went anonymously to shelters for homeless girls. She visited sometimes, wearing sunglasses and a scarf, dropping off supplies. She saw herself in their eyes, the fear, the hunger, but she couldn't save them all. She could only hope that her success was proof that destiny could be rewritten. Life was perfect, almost too perfect. But there was one room in their large house that remained empty. For 3 years they had tried for a child. For 3 years the tests had come back negative. It was the only shadow in their sunlit world. The morning sickness started on a Tuesday, right in the middle of a board meeting. Cynthia blamed it on the seafood pasta she had eaten the night before. But when the nausea persisted for a week, accompanied by a fatigue that felt different from work stress, hope began to flutter in her chest like a trapped bird. She bought the test kit on her way home, hiding it in her purse as if it were contraband. When she took the test in their master bathroom, her hands trembled so much she almost dropped it. 2 lines. Cynthia sat on the cold tiles and wept. These were not tears of sorrow, nor were they the tears of fear she had shed in her youth. They were tears of pure, unadulterated grace. When Edward came home, she didn't say a word. She simply handed him the stick. Edward, the stoic architect who built skyscrapers, fell to his knees and buried his face in her stomach, sobbing. "We did it," he whispered into her blouse. "A family, we are going to be a family." The pregnancy was not easy. Cynthia's ankles swelled and her back ached constantly, but she wore every symptom like a badge of honor. Her body, which had once been a vessel for survival, was now a vessel for life. She was 8 months gone, her belly a magnificent curve that announced her victory to the world. By the 8th month, Cynthia was blooming. Her skin, fed by good food and peace of mind, glowed with a radiance that turned heads whenever she entered a room. She had slowed down at work, delegating tasks so she could focus on nesting. She spent her days decorating the nursery. They chose a theme of sunrise, soft yellows and oranges. It was symbolic. This child would never know the night. This child would only know warmth, love, and abundance. One Saturday morning, Cynthia stood in front of the full-length mirror in their bedroom. She wore a flowing maternity dress made of expensive silk that draped over her bump. She touched her stomach, feeling the baby kick, a strong, rhythmic thump. "You are impatient," she cooed, rubbing the spot, "just like your father." Edward walked in carrying a tray of sliced fruits. He stopped, admiring his wife. To him, she was more beautiful now than the day he met her. The sharp angles of hunger were gone, replaced by the softness of motherhood. "You look like a queen," Edward said, wrapping his arms around her from behind and resting his hands on her belly. "I feel like a whale," Cynthia laughed, leaning back into him. "None of my shoes fit anymore, I need new sandals, and we still haven't bought the stroller." "Then we go shopping," Edward declared, kissing her neck. "Today is for you and the baby." "I don't want to go to the island," Cynthia said as they finished breakfast. "The traffic on the bridge will be terrible on a Saturday." "We can go to the new mall in Eichja," Edward suggested. "It's closer. They have that high-end baby store, mother and child. We can get the stroller, the crib sheets, and maybe some new clothes for you." Cynthia hesitated. Eichja was close to her past. It was close to the streets she used to roam, but she was a different woman now. She was Mrs. Cole. She drove a Range Rover. She had security. The ghosts of the past couldn't touch her. "Okay," she agreed, finishing her orange juice. "Eichja City Mall it is, but I want ice cream from that fancy place upstairs." "You can have the whole tub," Edward laughed, grabbing his car keys. They left the house around noon. The sun was high and bright. As they drove towards the mall, listening to soft jazz in the climate-controlled comfort of the car, Cynthia felt a strange sense of anticipation. It wasn't dread exactly, but a prickly feeling on the back of her neck. She brushed it off as pregnancy hormones. Today was a happy day. She was going to buy things for her child. She was holding her husband's hand. Nothing could ruin this. Little did she know the ghosts of the past weren't just shadows. Sometimes they went shopping too. The Eichja City Mall was a bustling hive of activity, a stark contrast to the chaotic heat outside. The automatic doors slid open, welcoming Cynthia and Edward with a blast of chilled air that smelled of popcorn and expensive perfume. For a moment, Cynthia paused, letting the coolness wash over her. It was a sensation of luxury, the ability to control one's climate. "Are you okay?" Edward asked, placing a hand on the small of her back. "I'm fine," she smiled, adjusting the strap of her designer handbag. Just enjoying the AC, the baby was getting hot. They navigated through the crowds of weekend shoppers. Families ate ice cream, teenagers took selfies, and couples held hands. Cynthia felt a profound sense of belonging. She was no longer an outsider looking in, she was part of this world. "I need to check the iStore for that adapter I told you about," Edward said as they reached the upper level. "Do you want to come with me?" Cynthia shook her head, pointing toward Mother and Child, a high-end boutique across the hall. The window display featured a white crib that looked like a cloud. "I'll be in there," she said, rubbing her belly. "I want to look at the strollers again. The one we saw online didn't look sturdy enough." "Okay, take your time. I'll join you in 10 minutes. Don't lift anything heavy," Edward warned playfully before kissing her cheek and heading toward the electronics store. Cynthia waddled into the baby store. It was quiet inside, filled with the soft sounds of lullabies playing over the speakers. She walked to the stroller section, her fingers trailing over soft blankets and tiny booties. She felt safe. She felt maternal. She felt peace. But peace, she would soon learn, is often the quiet before the storm. The baby store was divided by aisles of towering shelves, stocked with diapers and formula. Cynthia was examining a pram imported from Italy, admiring the leather handles, when a voice drifted over from the checkout counter. "What do you mean 50,000 naira? Is it made of gold?" Cynthia froze. Her hand gripped the handle of the pram so hard her knuckles turned white. It had been nearly 9 years, but she would know that voice anywhere. It was the voice that had screamed at her to wake up at 4:00 a.m. It was the voice that had ridiculed her parents' death. It was the sound of her nightmares. Slowly, against her better judgment, Cynthia moved toward the end of the aisle. She peered around a display of baby monitors. Standing at the counter was a woman arguing with the salesgirl. It was Auntie Funmi, but she looked different. The arrogance was still there, but the polish was gone. Her wig was dry and slightly askew. Her wrapper looked faded, the lace worn thin at the edges. Her face was etched with deep lines of bitterness and exhaustion. She looked older than her years, worn down by a life that hadn't gone according to plan. She was haggling over the price of a baby gift set, likely for a friend or perhaps a distant relative. She looked desperate. Cynthia's heart hammered against her ribs. Part of her wanted to turn around and run back to Edward. But another part, the part of her that had survived the streets, stood her ground. She was not the maid anymore. She was not the victim. She took a deep breath, smoothed her silk dress over her heavy belly and stepped out from behind the aisle. "Madam, the price is fixed," the salesgirl said, looking tired. "This is a boutique, not a market." "You people are thieves," Funmi spat, throwing the gift set on the counter. "I will go elsewhere." As Funmi turned to storm out, she almost collided with Cynthia. "Watch where you are going," Funmi snapped instinctively. Then she stopped. She looked at the expensive silk dress. She looked at the glowing skin. She looked at the heavy gold jewelry adorning Cynthia's neck and wrists. Finally, her eyes met Cynthia. Funmi blinked, she squinted. "Cynthia." The name came out as a question, laced with disbelief. "Hello, Auntie Funmi," Cynthia said. Her voice was calm, steady, and rich with a confidence she had built brick by brick. Funmi's mouth fell open. She looked Cynthia up and down, her eyes lingering on the massive baby bump. The shock on her face was absolute. She had expected Cynthia to be dead or perhaps rotting in a village somewhere. She certainly didn't expect this. "You," Funmi stammered, "you are pregnant." "Yes," Cynthia replied, resting a protective hand on her stomach. 8 months. Funmi recovered from her shock, and the old malice crept back into her eyes. But it was weaker now, diluted by obvious envy. "So you found a man to keep you. Is that it? You ran away to become a harlot, and this is the result." Cynthia didn't flinch. "I ran away to survive the hell you created, and I didn't find a keeper, I found a husband." The air between them crackled with tension. Shoppers nearby glanced over, sensing the drama, but Cynthia didn't care. "Husband," Funmi let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Who would marry a gutter rat like you? Probably some old man who needed a nurse." "He is young, kind, and successful," Cynthia said softly. "Everything Uncle Jide isn't." The mention of Jide hit a nerve. Funmi's face crumpled. "Don't speak about him, that useless man. He lost his job 3 years ago, we have nothing, and here you are parading yourself." Funmi's eyes dropped to Cynthia's belly again. The look was terrifying. It was a mixture of hatred and profound, agonizing longing. You stole this, Funmi hissed, stepping closer. You stole my luck, I fed you, I housed you, and you repaid me by running away with my blessings. Look at you, fat with child, and I am still. She couldn't say the word, barren. Cynthia realized then that the woman standing before her wasn't a monster. She was a tragedy. Funmi had spent her life being bitter, and it had eaten her from the inside out. She was childless, broke, and miserable. I didn't steal anything, Auntie, Cynthia said, her voice dropping to a whisper. God doesn't work that way. You can't plant thorns and expect to harvest roses. Shut up, Funmi raised her voice, causing the salesgirl to reach for the security button. You think you are better than me because you have money. You are still the girl who slept on the floor. The shield. Is there a problem here? The voice was deep, authoritative, and calm. Edward appeared at Cynthia's side. He didn't look at Funmi. His eyes were fixed on his wife, scanning her face for distress. He wrapped a protective arm around her shoulders, his presence dominating the small space. Funmi froze. She looked at Edward, tall, handsome, wearing a tailored shirt and an expensive watch. He looked like a king. Edward, Cynthia said, leaning into him, this is my uncle's wife, Funmi. Edward's expression hardened. He knew the stories. He knew about the scars, both physical and emotional. He turned his gaze slowly toward Funmi. It wasn't a look of anger, it was a look of absolute disdain, as if he were looking at something unpleasant on the sole of his shoe. So, Edward said, his voice icy, you are the woman. Funmi shrank back. In the face of Edward's quiet power, her bravado evaporated. She looked small, she looked cheap. I was just greeting her, Funmi stammered, clutching her handbag. We don't need your greetings, Edward said firmly. My wife is upset, and when my wife is upset I get very unpleasant. I suggest you leave. Funmi looked from Edward to Cynthia. She saw the bond between them, the unshakable unit they formed. She saw the child in Cynthia's womb, the future she would never have. Defeated, Funmi stepped back. I'm going. She turned and hurried out of the store, her footsteps heavy, disappearing into the crowd without looking back. Sunrise. Cynthia watched her aunt disappear. She waited for the anger to come, but it didn't. Instead, she felt a massive weight lift off her chest. The boogeyman was gone. The monster was just a sad, lonely woman. Are you okay? Edward asked again, turning her to face him, his eyes filled with concern. Did she hurt you? Do I need to call security? Cynthia looked up at him and smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that reached her eyes. No, Edward, she didn't hurt me. She can't hurt me anymore. She looked down at her belly. The baby kicked, a strong affirmation of life. I feel sorry for her, Cynthia said quietly. She's still trapped in the darkness, but I'm out, we're out. Edward kissed her forehead. Yes, we are. Let's buy the stroller, Cynthia said, her voice strong. The blue one, and let's get the matching car seat, our son needs the best. They made their purchases, laughing as they tried to fit the boxes into the cart. As they walked out of the mall, the sun was beginning to set, painting the Lagos sky in brilliant hues of orange and purple. Cynthia paused at the entrance, taking a deep breath of the warm evening air. She thought of the rain, the cold nights, the hunger and the fear. They felt like stories from another lifetime. She took Edward's hand, interlacing their fingers. Ready to go home? He asked. Yes, Cynthia said, stepping forward. Let's go home. The shadows were behind them now. Ahead there was only the sunrise. Thank you for listening to Cynthia's story. Remember, life may test you, and the past may try to hold you back. But strength, determination, and faith in yourself can turn any tragedy into triumph. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Stories with Grandma Celine. Turn on the notification bell to never miss a story of African wisdom, resilience, and life lessons.